introduce our first speaker, Dr. Tim Fox. When I'm introducing, maybe Siva, you can give the sharing rights to him so that he can share and get things ready. So Dr. Tim Fox is an internationally recognized expert in climate change mitigation and adaptation with specialized knowledge of clean energy, sustainable cooling, sea level rise, and the process engineering-based industries. He chairs the Climate Change Adaptation Working Group in IMechE and is also an advisory committee member for the Caribbean Center for Rising Seas. Dr. Fox has authored numerous peer-reviewed papers, research reports, thought leadership reports, and policy papers. Was also a lead author of IMechE seminal 2009. He has also published another report on rising seas, the engineering challenge. So with this huge experience, I welcome Dr. Tim Fox to give his plenary talks. Dr. Fox, over to you. Dr. Fox, can you unmute and start?
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yeah, you are fine.
Yeah, so the controls weren't responding, but I think there was a lag between me clicking and things happening.
Yeah, so Dr. Fox, just quick information that we have 15 minutes for each speaker. So yes. I request you to kindly keep up to the time.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my 15 minutes start now. Okay, here we go. Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So I'm an absolute pleasure to be presenting here at this workshop that, as you've heard earlier, it's taken some time to pull together in the current circumstances, but I'm very pleased to be talking to you about the topic of sea level rise. And this is a topic that we at the Institution of Mechanical Engineers have been taking much more interest in recently. And I'm going to talk you through some of the work that we've been doing. Now, for some reason, my slides are not advancing. So, is it possible for you to take the control? Yeah, for some reason, is that responding now?
Yes, it's moving.
Okay. Well, I'll keep controlling until something happens. Okay, thank you. So, I want to start by explaining some of the background to the engineering response to sea level rise, and in this respect, we need to understand some of the physical aspects of sea level rise. So it's over on a geological timescale. Sea level is not an absolute. We know that over geological time, over millions of years, sea level is constantly changing in line with a number of cyclic natural events to do with the Earth's orbit and the rhythms of some of the climate systems. There's plenty of evidence around the world to show us that, and indeed evidence of raised wave platforms and beaches show us that at one stage sea level was much higher, and drowned valleys, which are known as RIAs, show us that sea level was much lower at some time. Indeed, where I'm talking to you from a coastal location in the UK, we have plenty of evidence around us of both of those aspects. And you can see in the graph below how over thousands of years that cycle of sea level rise and fall plays out. And what is the relationship between this and the ice masses on the planet, and indeed the atmospheric temperature? So sea level rise and fall is intrinsically related to changes in the amount of ice that is the land-based ice that is on the planet, and these the periods of high ice mass on the planet are known as glacial periods, and periods of low mass are known as interglacial periods. So ice ages and interglacials. And the relationship is very clear between the volume of ice and the mass of ice and the global temperature. So as temperatures go up, obviously the ice melts and the sea rises. And as the temperature falls, we get ice formation and the opposite occurs. And there's a very clear correlation within the geological record between global atmospheric temperature and sea level rise and fall. And you can see this in these two graphs below. And one of the key things for us as engineers is to understand that sea level rise could change quite dramatically over quite a short space of time. So you see here in this chart how around 15,000 years ago there was a substantial increase in sea level rise of the order of around 300 millimeters per decade as a result of physical processes associated with those ice sheets melting and retreating. And so, you know, that sort of sea level rise is within the scale of human perception, of course, and it can cause significant challenges for human society if it is a modern society like ours that has been fully engineered. So fortuitously for us, but unfortuitously in many ways that I will explain in a moment, sea level has been, to human perception, relatively stable for around the last 5,000 years, as you can see from this graph. And so what has happened is that we've developed all our engineering approaches and methodologies and design approaches to deal with a sea level that is essentially stable. So engineering has evolved as a practice in modern society during this period of stability, and any change to that in the future represents a really significant challenge to engineers, because it affects one of the most fundamental design criteria that we have within the coastal environment, which is the height of the high tide. And currently that means that we have a very narrow but extremely convenient perspective on sea level rise. Well, the challenge we have is that the future of sea level levels around the world is rooted in a fundamental instability. So there's a wide range of estimates associated with the degree of sea level rise that we will encounter over this century and into the coming centuries, as a result of uncertainty around the instability of the melting land-based ice sheets. So in particular, ice sheets in Greenland and Antarctica. So if we look at the latest projections from the UN IPCC, for example, which form part of the physical science basis of assessment report 6 that we talked about earlier, the maximum that was predicted under the high emission scenario is a sea level rise of 1 meter in global mean sea level. Now, by the end of the century. But the report is significantly different from the previous assessment report 5, in that it now recognizes that we cannot rule out potentially much higher sea level rises as a result of this uncertainty in the ice sheet processes, particularly in Antarctica and indeed Greenland. And we could even see something like 2 meters of sea level rise by 2100 and 5 meters by 2150. And indeed, NOAA, the United States organization that looks after the oceans and atmosphere, has stated that up to 2.7 meters of global mean sea level rise is plausible by 2100. And of course, as engineers, this presents us with a significant challenge in terms of any infrastructure that we're designing today, because as John Doerr and others have pointed out so far in this morning's workshop, our infrastructure can be around for 50, 100, 150, 200 years, and much of it gets refurbished and reused, and if the infrastructure itself doesn't get reused, indeed the sites that the infrastructure is located on gets reused. So we have a fundamental requirement as engineers to take a new perspective on the potential of future sea level rise. But there are many complicating factors that, as engineers, we need to take into account. I just want to point to one of them. So when we are designing for sea level rise, and we want to understand what the sea level will be at any point at any point in time and at any location, we not only have to deal with all the uncertainty associated with the melting of the ice sheets, we also have to deal with uncertainty around changes in the land height itself relative to the sea. So there are two areas that we need to be concerned with there. Changes in groundwater level. So here is the picture of Jakarta, where groundwater abstraction from under the city has led to the city city land level going down relative to the sea, and of course the sea is going up relative to the land. So this leads to issues of submergence, and indeed you may have heard recently that the government have decided to relocate the capital of Indonesia to another location to avoid the future challenges that will pose. Another major factor that we have to take into account, of course, is post-glacial sinking and rising. So as glaciers retreat from land, the weight of those glaciers is taken off the land, and the land will rise. And indeed, if you have a geographical location like the UK that was only partially covered with ice, then the land that was covered with ice goes up. For example, Scotland is going up, whereas that in the south of England is going down because it didn't have any ice on it originally, and a balancing of the Earth's crust is taking place. So we have to take that into account, but we also have to take into account the fact that many of the projections that we receive from the scientific community are in relation to the global mean sea level, whereas we need to work out the local sea level. And there are many geographical and geomorphological aspects and ocean current aspects that we have to take into account when doing that. But many of these calculations associated with land height and local geographical conditions can be well calculated. The big factor that is uncertain for us is the degree to which that the ice sheets will melt. So here at the IMechE, we recognize that challenge, and we put in place a project during 2018 to examine what these challenges might look like for the engineering profession going forward. And we undertook a series of evidence gathering activities, one-to-one consultations, and facilitated workshops both in the UK and indeed in India as part of our initial collaborations around adaptation. And in 2019, we published what was really a landmark report for the engineering community, where we considered the challenges associated with this uncertainty in the ice sheets, particularly in regards to the built environment and privately owned infrastructure assets, such as process engineering facilities, so oil and gas plants, wastewater treatment works, chemical processing plants, pharmaceutical plants, etc. And we have subsequently been disseminating that information to the members and indeed to the wider professions, governments, and broader society, both in the UK and internationally. And today's event is part of that. So let's quickly run through some of the basic findings of the report. So the bottom line really is, what would 1 meter of global mean sea level rise do? And this map this chart shows you the sort of, with the red areas, the areas that would be have an increased risk of coastal flooding as a result of 1 meter of global mean sea level rise globally. So we chose that 1 meter to be consistent with the predictions of the IPCC in terms of the sea level rise that was projected under a worst case scenario by the end of the century. But that's not where the flooding problem and challenge ends. We identified within our work what we called a triple whammy event, which would bring significant challenges to engineer infrastructure in the coastal zone. This is a combination of an extreme high tide superimposed on a sea level that has already risen or is rising, and a storm event bringing a storm surge and heavy rainfall to a river system, and therefore leading to increased risk of fluvial flooding in a scenario where we're looking at a city and industrial infrastructure located on the coast at a river's mouth. And this is really one of the most extreme combined climate change impact events that we need to consider within the engineering community. So briefly, what can we do as engineers, and what are our options in dealing with the challenge of sea level rise? Well, of course, we could build barriers and higher walls around our communities and engineered infrastructure, but there is a limit to what we can do there, because sea level rise will have widespread geographical impacts and will affect extremely large areas, and there is only so much engineered hard infrastructure that we would want to build, both from an economic, social, and indeed environmental aspect. So, what other options do we have? Well, we could put buildings and infrastructure on stilts, and indeed we're seeing that happening at a residential level at many locations around the world. Of course, that's much trickier, much harder to do and engineer in terms of infrastructure and private process engineering assets, etc. But if we did do that, we need to also think about the services entering those facilities, and we might want to put them overhead. Or indeed, we might think about tethered pontoons, and there has been a lot of work done on that with flexible services coming from below. Of course, we could make space for water, so we could create spaces in our urban environment or our natural environment where the water could go in times of flooding, and those spaces would be used as recreational spaces at times when the coastal flooding is not impinging on the location. Or of course, ultimately, we could abandon places and retreat to higher ground, but there are significant socio-economic and political challenges associated with doing that. So let me just run through the project findings, and I point you to the report for the findings in detail. You can find it on the IMechE's website. But just briefly, we looked at two areas. We looked at building services and process industries. In the building services area, we were looking at services such as electrical power, water, gas utility, drainage, sewage, and new technologies associated with renewable distribution of heat, etc. And we were looking at sea level rise affecting coastal flooding in communities both large and small worldwide. And the big issue here for us as engineers is the underground services, and those services in the lower levels of buildings that will be exposed to corrosive seawater and moisture, and in particular electrical equipment, which is a real paradigm shift in what we have to design for. And we had recognized that in many cases the repair, replacement, and renewing of a lot of this underground infrastructure will be incredibly expensive and disruptive. And there is evidence already all over the world of it not being done post coastal flooding, and areas becoming blighted with no services, and that's a social problem. Just looking at process engineering infrastructure, these are the sort of areas we were looking at. They're covered by the Process Industries Division. As we know, they underpin the economic well-being of local places as well as nations as a whole. And what we did find is that progress on implementing coastal flooding adaptation measures, particularly in relation to future sea level rise, has to date been extremely limited in these areas. So just a quick look at the sort of things that we need to think about, and that we laid out about 20 design challenges within the report itself. Of course, there's the fundamental issue of storm surge loading of buildings and structures. So what sort of structural loading do we have to allow for? What height can we expect those storm surges to be? We have issues of overloading of surface water wastewater systems, and obviously restricted access to the plants by transport, taking feedstock in and out of the plant. And indeed, this relates to what John Dora was saying earlier about interdependencies. We have similar issues around water ingress into electrical equipment and disruption of the services, similar issues to what we had with the built environment. Moisture damage to feedstocks themselves that are stored on the site, and indeed dry product that is waiting to be exported from the site, and corrosion of pipework. Changes in groundwater composition and volumes can lead to hydraulic uplift on submerged pipelines and corrosion. And indeed, groundwater contamination can occur from environmental and ecological damage can occur from stored. Sorry, there's something from stored product, or indeed stored feedstock that is on the site, or waste that has been stored on the site. So there's significant challenges there. So just briefly, because much as this has been touched on in my introductory talk, and indeed by John Dora when discussing standards, we need to think about how we can design and operate in such an uncertain world. And John has already talked about standards and the work that's going on in standards and structural design codes through SEN and SENLEC and the BSI and the ISO organization. So I just want to draw your attention again to that, because that is our starting point as engineers. But fundamentally, as you will have gathered from the talks that both I and John have been giving, that there is a huge amount of work that still needs to be done in this area for us as an engineering community to have practical starting points for this design, for these design challenges in such an uncertain environment. And we do need to develop more guidance, methodologies, and tools that take into account the adaptive pathways type approach that John has been talking about, probabilistic methods, and indeed safety margins. And we did hear something in the last talk around safety margins being applied to design for flooding.
Tim, can you?
I'm just wrapping up now. Yes, I'm finishing now. The next slide is the last one, I think. So we need outcomes that are adaptive ready and future-proofed, and we need to think about new builds and retrofits. Sorry, I keep getting a message that comes up in the middle of my screen. So let me get rid of that. Okay. So just to conclude, the world's warming, land-based glaciers and ice sheets are melting and the seas are rising, but there's considerable uncertainty about what will take place at any given location and any time. Historical data no longer apply, and we need to design now, potentially for the first meter, because we know that is going to happen this century, or it's very highly likely it will happen this century. But we need to do what John Dora was saying earlier and be adaptive ready for the additional meters as and when they come along. That I'm happy to take further discussion on this in the Q&A session, and I point you to the IMechE report for much more detail on this. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Tim, and it is actually excellent talk, and you have covered a lot of details within a short span of time. I know it is very difficult to actually cover the topic within this 15 minutes time. You have in fact given us an overview of the global temperature pattern and ice volume and its melting, as well as the sea level rise and its effect on coastal as well as inland infrastructures, and also you have touched upon the options for adaptation. So I'm sure there will be a lot of questions from the participants. We'll take all the questions during the Q&A session. But right now we'll quickly move on to our next talk by Professor Nobuhito Mori. So Professor Mori, you can set up your presentation. Meanwhile, I'll just quickly introduce you. Professor Mori is a professor and deputy director of Disaster Prevention Research Institute in Kyoto University, Japan. Prior to this, he was associated with the Central Research Institute of Electric Power Industry, Japan, and Osaka City University, Japan. He is also a team member of an expert team on coastal and emergency response, marine meteorological and oceanographic services, World Meteorological Organization, He is also a Japanese governmental reviewer for IPCC AR6 Working Group 1 and 2. His interest areas include ARC interface physics, climate change, geophysical and environmental fluid mechanics, and nonlinear wave dynamics. As applications of these fundamental phenomena, the targets of his research are understanding mechanism of extreme events and reduction extreme ocean waves, storm surges, and tsunami disasters. So, with this quick overview of his background and expertise, I welcome Professor Mori to deliver his talk. Over to you, Professor Mori.
Thank you, Professor Behera. Can you hear me and can you see my screen?
Yes.
Thank you for a nice introduction. My name is Mori from Kyoto University, Japan, and today I'm going to talk about the projection of the extreme sea level and its application to the coastal structure in Japan. So, besides this introduction, Professor Behera, I've been working with Japanese National Climate Projection Program last 15 years, and I'm currently leader of the extreme hazard projection in a Togo program driven in Japanese government. So in Togo program, we have 4 groups, and 3 groups are mainly developing global circulation model and projection, such as MILOC and Japanese Meteorological Research Institute, GCM, MRI GCM. And our group is mainly use their projection for extreme hazard. In SROC, just before the AR6, a new idea of sea level has been introduced in 2019, which is the extreme sea level. So until the AR5, IPCC basically deal with mean sea level changes, so-called sea level rise. But after that, we are going to consider storm surges and wave run-up and so on. So this is quite important for designing or adaptations, making adaptation strategy. And the mean sea level rise is mainly changes of the sea level with 1 or 2 meter maximally with very gradual changes in time and space. On the other hand, extreme sea level, including storm surges or wave, is very short time phenomena, and it also localized in space, but it can be ranged from 1 to 10 meters, depending on the region. So for designing structure or disaster risk reduction, we may need to consider as 2 components with astronomical tide. So we have been working with 3 different type of the sea level projections last 10 years. So I'm briefly introducing our latest activities. And time is pretty limited, so I put several review papers on the chat. So if you're curious about more details of our activities, please check our recent 2 or 3 review papers on the chat. So first is the sea level projection. This is just figure from the AR6 SPM 8, figure 8. So in AR6, it's not really different from the sea level projection from AR5 or SROC, but confidence of the sea level projection became virtually certain. So projection of the sea level became more solid compared with previous report. And range of the sea level rise will be 0.63 to 1.101 meter in AR6, although it was 5 to 10 centimeter lower in AR5, but it's basically pretty similar. But now we introduce new scenario, so-called SSP with RCP compared with AR5. But anyway, expected sea level rise in SSP 8.5 is around 0.8 plus minus 20 centimeter at the end of this century. Sorry. And we also need to consider the dynamic sea surface height. Dynamic sea surface height is different from sea level rise. Even without global warming, sea level can be changed. That is the dynamic sea level height. That also need to consider for the designing structure with astronomical types. So we have been working with how natural variability can be contribute to the dynamic sea surface height with global atmospheric and ocean circulation model. So this is a mean dynamic sea surface height with 50 member ensemble by MMRDA 6. So it can be ranged plus minus 20 centimeter, depend on the location. And plus minus 20 centimeter is a little bit small, but if you consider the sea level rise with RHP 2.6, it is not negligible actually. Then next is a wave run-up. Wave in here means storm waves, which having 5 to 15 seconds in time. So under the WMO, World Meteorological Organization, and the JCOM, a joint community in UNESCO, we have been working with wave climate projection last 10 years. The so-called Coordinated Ocean Wave Climate Projection project, COWCRI, with this website. And then we try to estimate how much extreme and mean wave height is going to be changed, depend on the location, scenario, and so on. So we have been worked with this from AR5. So this is our latest projection for the future changes in mean wave height. So blue color indicate negative, decreasing mean wave height, and warmer color indicate increasing wave height in the ocean. And then left bottom panel indicate future changes in mean wave height by RHP 2.6, and the right-hand side is similar, but for RHP 8.5 at the end of this century. So you may see the clear decreasing mean wave height in the northern hemisphere, but increasing mean sea level in southern hemisphere, especially close to the Antarctic Ocean and western part of the South America. So these changes are mainly due to the shift of the westerly wind, general circulation to polarward. Then high latitude area, we will see the increasing mean wave height, but will be decreasing in the mid latitude, except western part of the South America. And then this is another type of the summary of future changes in mean wave climate. And climate change will affect not only the wave height, but also the wave direction and wave period, which are important to estimate beach erosion or beach accumulation, depends on location. So different area has different characteristic of the wave climate change. For example, in Europe is almost edge of this map, but in European area, we see the decreasing both wave height and wave period. But other area, for example, west coast of the Mexico, we will see the positive trend of the mean wave height and wave period. And in Indian area is rather neutral. So third component is the storm surges, which Professor Fox mentioned briefly during his talk. So storm surge is pretty difficult to estimate a project considering climate change because it's pretty intense, but a very short-term event, both time and space. So even present climate, it's pretty difficult to estimate intensity and frequency of the storm surge at a particular location. So we try to get projects such extreme event by the climate model. So we conducted large ensemble projection, so-called D4PDF, a few years ago. So this is, oops. movie of the how a large ensemble can be useful for the extreme hazard. So one projection is not appropriate to estimate 1 by 100 years or 1 by 50 years event. But if we increase the number of the event up to a few thousand years, estimate projection of the 1 by 100 years event is not really difficult. So what we did was we integrated global circulation model over 5,000 years entire globe and try to estimate 1 by 100 or 1 by one few hundred years event entire globe as well as East Asia. So we also conducted downscaling from global model to the more East Asia or Japan scale up to 5-kilometer resolution for 5,000 years. So then using this kind of large ensemble projection, we can estimate extreme precipitation, tropical cyclone event, storm surges, and others. So this is one of example how tropical cyclone intensity and frequency are going to be changed in the future. Blue color indicate present climate, and red color line indicate a +4-degree future. So this is an example in Western North Pacific region. We will see the very significant decrease of the tropical cyclone number in future. So more than it will be around 50% decrease compared in +4K future climate condition compared to the present climate condition. And the right-hand side is a minimum central pressure change. It will be opposite. For example, if you are curious, a very intense tropical cyclone around 920 hectopascal, it will be 1 by 1,000 probability, but it will be an increase +1 order in +4K warmer climate condition. So based on this large ensemble, we made a projection of the storm surges entire globe. This is one of example 1 by 100 years storm surges over the globe using D4PDF, and positive color on the coastline indicate positive increase of the 1 by 100 storm surge height, and the blue color indicate a negative effect. So Indian region is a rather neutral in south, but it will be increased to the north. In Japan is more intense in the western part, but it will be neutral to the north. And the European region is moderate, but we expect more than 10% of the changes of the extreme storm surge height in area. So it was not possible using this large ensemble projection, but now we are getting better to project extreme event based on the latest climate projection. And this is another curious, interesting result for intensity and frequency relation of the storm surge at particular area. This is one example with Osaka Bay in Japan, which is the second largest city in Japan. And the horizontal axis is the storm surge height, and vertical axis the return period of the storm surge. And the blue color indicate present, and the red color indicate +4K degree warmer climate. So you may see the decreasing storm surge for a short-term period because future tropical cyclone number will be decreased in short. But if you focus on the extreme storm surge, +4K climate will be intense compared with a present climate, because we will see the fewer tropical cyclone, but intense tropical cyclone in future. So balance of the frequency and the intensity of the tropical cyclone gives a very curious such kind of result in the hazard. So last part of my talk will be adaptation. So this is a schematic view of from our project, and the blue color indicate an intensity of the natural hazard. You may understand blue line can be storm surge height or extreme sea surface height. then based on the sea level rise and the changing extreme, we will see some extreme event from present to the future. And green line indicate capacity of the society. You can be regarded as a dike of the breakwater or river embankment. So infrastructure takes a long time to make a planning and installation compared with agriculture business. So we cannot adapt immediately changing the climate. So we are very curious time scale of the adaptation strategy. And so it can be a next challenge to estimate what kind of adaptation can be possible under the changing climate. However, we are currently facing more realistic problems. So this is, sorry, this is in Japanese, but left panel is ground level of the Osaka. And blue color indicate below the sea level. So most of the part of the city of Osaka is below the sea level. So similar to the Louisiana and or maybe some part of the Netherlands. So main part of the city is protected by the seawall, white lines. And there are three big storm surge barrier to protect inside of the city because it is not cost effective to make a very high wall along the river into the city. So main part of the city is protected by the three big barriers. And this is the example how a storm surge barrier.
Professor Mori, sorry, Professor Mori, to interrupt you. Can we quickly move on?
Okay, I'm going to finish. So this barrier was very effective, very severe storm surge event 3 years ago. And you may see, very clear storm surge in right-hand side, but it was very effective. But it needs to be replaced soon. So we are now making a new design to replace these three storms barriers in Japan based on our climate projection. And I want to emphasize, at the end, I want to emphasize that we have only 1 or 2 times choice to changing such kind of large infrastructure to adjusting changing climate. So we don't have many opportunity to update our infrastructure. So now it's a real problem now. Sorry, running my time, so I'm going to end my talk. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Professor Mori. And this is so an excellent talk. Again, you have covered various details, and you talked about the total sea level effect that includes not only the sea level rise, it includes the dynamic sea surface height, includes the storm surge and wave runoff during the storm surge. And also you have explained how the prediction can be done from global to local regions considering different climate scenarios. In addition, you have also explained about the strategies. So I'm sure again there will be questions on this. We'll take the questions after the next talk by Mr. Shri Shankar Deshpande. And let me now quickly introduce Shri Shankar Deshpande, who graduated in civil engineering and with post-graduation in town planning and urban planning from IMechE Rotterdam. He is currently the Joint Project Director of Town Planning in Mumbai Metropolitan Region Development Authority, MMRDA, we call it, in the government of Maharashtra in India. With more than 20 years of experience across various sectors, including town planning, urban budget, infrastructure budget, solid waste management, water resources, hydrology, e-governance, urban design, environmental engineering, and smart city, and so on, including metro rail development, regional water supply schemes, and clean energy technology, and so on. Currently, he is driving the solid waste management, clean green technologies, and smart city with e-governance initiatives at MMRDA. So he is actually having a vast, wide governance as well as administrative experience with all implementation of different technologies. I'm sure his talk is going to be informative and looking forward to it, sir. So over to you, Shri Shankar Deshpande, sir.
Thank you, Professor Manas. I hope I'm audible and my slides are seen.
Yes.
Yeah. So, friends from Japan and IIT Mumbai, and
Just a quick request. If it is PDF, if you can go to view and make it full screen. In the PDF document, just click view on the top. Yeah, excellent.
it's okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, greetings from Mumbai. Hope the pandemic is making you all safe in the conference online. That's the way we are doing it now. Thank you, IIT, for inviting me to give a brief talk about this very talk about subject and a matter of concern for all of us, especially the urban local bodies and the planning authorities all over the world when we touch upon through our master plans and town plans to the local communities all over. If I go further, and most of the slides I'll just try to rush out because the events have been talked about by my earlier speakers. Thank you for giving all the information which I already collected. If you can see and appreciate that the sea level rise is definitely going to take place as per the various research reports and my earlier colleagues who have also talked. How do we handle it at MMRDA for the Mumbai Metropolitan region and for the government level or for the cities and for the coastal cities? That's what my talk is going to talk about. I'm going to focus about that. The primary drivers are the mean sea level, ocean currents, temperature rise, the climate changes which are taking place, and the runoff and quick runoffs which are leading to time of concentrations being low, urban heat island effects which we talked about, and the local floods which are taking place. So how do we deal with all of those? If we see, because I'm given to told the subject is restricting to Maharashtra, Mumbai, and metropolitan area. But let me talk about what is pan India going to happen if the sea level rises. And if some of the information which I have collected is restricted to Mumbai metropolitan region, we see about 37 million population is vulnerable to the rise in sea level. So that's alarming, and we at government level are taking it seriously to deal with this and have mitigation measures in place. Some of the local names which my friends abroad may not appreciate or may not be familiar with, but just to keep the context right, if you see the coastal cities, let me see where the pointer is here. If you see the North Konkan area, South Konkan area, and South Kannada, this is end of Maharashtra, and we see the coastal areas in red, as well as the coastal cities in the blue. And if you see the population on the tables here, we are almost seeing 37 million population which will be vulnerable by the year 2050. If we see only about Mumbai metropolitan region, where my area is predominantly for administrative and planning purposes limited to, not only that, it's an urban agglomeration of about 20 million population going to about 30 million population very soon in about next 10 to 15 years. So this is a geographical area of about 6,000 square kilometers, having 9 corporations, 9 councils, and 1,000 villages, and 23 million population presently. And if you see, presently we are having warm and humid climate, about 2,500 millimeters of annual rainfall. But again, my Professor Muzumdar sir rightly touched upon in the earlier session that it is not the rainfall, but it is the extreme events, or it is the intensity of rainfall in a very short period of time, which is a matter of concern, along with the high level rise in this and the storm events taking place. What exactly is worrying us all about is storms and flooding, tides, changing coastlines, the saltwater intrusion taking place, and the subsidence. All these are impacts of sea level rise. This is definitely, we have many causes to that. Some are human, some are natural, some are known, some are unknown. But the most alarming aspect while we are doing infrastructure planning is that the data of the past is not that useful now to predict the infrastructure planning of the future for its resilience and resistance. Now, what we do is we plan our infrastructure like metros or bridges over the sea for next 100 years. And when you do that, we see the data or the highest rainfall events, or 1 in 10, 1 in 100 events for what we call in return period periods. But one of the research reports, and Muzumdar sir also told in one of his reports that the Columbia model, they are saying that the events of the past are only going to be used by 2027. That is what I learned half an hour back or 1 hour back. Now, we at all government levels definitely will have to see the new standards, whether the return periods are useful. So these are learnings for me today, and I'll have to take back to the government in this. However, what we have also observed is a very high rainfall events have been increasing. This has been found by the Chitale Committee report, and the Chitale Committee report is knowing about the Miti River. In 2005, Mumbai received about 944 millimeters of rainfall in 24 hours, and we were flooded. There were huge casualties and loss to the city. We had about the lifeline of Mumbai, which is the railway line, which was not working. The airport was inundated, and there are lots of distress in the society during that time. So if those events don't have to happen, but we have seen in the last 10 years or from 2005 flood up till now that extreme events are happening. They are also colliding with the highest high tide, and therefore the situation in the urban areas is becoming grave. If we see some of the information which is available on the web, we can see that about 86% of the population, that is 3 million population by 2100, will have to be just shifted only because of the 3-meter rise which is going to or likely or projected in this city of Mumbai. So this is a really alarming situation for which governments have to enact. These are again 4 probabilities of what we can see, because as rightly said by my earlier speakers, the possibility has to be downscaled to the local phenomena and local geography. Now, if you see the land below 1 meter, or we see the land projected to be below annual flood levels, or the land projected to be below tide level, we can see in red color the vulnerability of Mumbai's thickly dense urban population located and getting exposed, because it's all the sea line which we can see, or the coastal area which is having high density of habitation presently. It not only its habitation, the most of the offices and the residential areas are located here. Definitely, this is going to affect the not only the livelihood of the people there, but this is Mumbai, as you know, is a commercial capital of India, and therefore we'll have to reconsider whether these offices, how do we plan for those, and how the infrastructure is planned for them, to how to mitigate that. If we appreciate what has been happening globally over the last 10-15 years of awareness in this climate change and the countries to be done, we have a national action plan on climate change in place, and we have a state level adaptation action plan. Just to tell you about what this basically does is to reduce the CFC content, to have less of carbon footprint, to have less of carbon emissions, and to separately be prepared, given alert system to achieve the sustainable development goals. This is all what is in the ambit of national action plan and the state action plans, what we are doing. Because short of time, I am not going into details of each of them. But what I would like to emphasize is what were we doing for Mumbai Metropolitan region. We have a plan in place. We act upon the plan. We observe and learn what are the learnings from that. If we have to adapt or adjust or amend those plans, we again adjust those plans and do go for implementation. The ultimate aim is to see that the mitigation measures are in place, as well as the sea level rise contributors are less and less done. That is, pollution is one. So to avoid more and more pollution or more of carbon emissions, which are causing this effect or which are leading to the what we can say melting of the ice and leading to high tide rise increase and as well as the sea level increase, is carbon emissions and CFC emissions. Both on both fronts we are doing. Metro is one such infrastructure which is likely to bring down the carbon emissions tremendously. If we can just see about 350 kilometers of metro line in Mumbai Metropolitan region, which we are planning in next 10 to 15 years, and which will be likely to completed very soon in the first phase or second phase, we'll see that about 1.3 million metric tons equivalent of carbon emissions will be reduced, which is again equivalent to 5 million trees of plantation. So if we see the huge amount of infrastructure load which we are trying to create through metro is not only giving comfort to the people, reduction in pollution and less of congestion on the roads, but is definitely contributing to the climate change as a positive measure in reducing carbon emissions and thereby delaying the heating as well as melting of the ice and then rise of the sea level, what we all anticipate. What are urban local bodies doing? Urban local bodies, as earlier said, not only the urban local bodies have the sea level influx, but there are also rivers which are getting flooded. So we have to be ready for both because of the sea rise increase and because of the extreme rainfall event which are happening in and around Mumbai. And each of the urban local bodies which we can see and tabulated here are taking steps for disaster management. They have a disaster management cell. There are alert systems which are there. There is technology, and what we can also say is the use of GIS mapping has been also done. Terrain mapping is also done, and we with IIT are also having many collaborative efforts to what we can do capacity building of the urban local bodies to handle this situation. Apart from this, what is the regulatory framework, governance intervention, and people-centric cities? What we are doing. Apart from this, we have to also take into consideration how our future building should come. How should be our storage systems? What should be our infrastructure doing? How do we conserve the existing open spaces? Do we have more holding ponds for the flood areas? All these things and local level regulatory framework or development control regulations or governance systems are in place. We have tackled the situation, we have addressed this issue, but however, we have to see whether we can protect by having dikes in we can see on the right hand side, or we can accommodate to certain extent by having stilts, or then we'll have to displace the people and move away. So from whether some protection, accommodation, nutrition, all will depend upon what kind of strategies we locally use and what kind of geography and terrains are available and what kind of mitigation measures we all adapt. But if we see for Mumbai Metropolitan region, we have a huge coastal wetland which is acting as a sponge, and this itself, wetlands, our government has been very sensitive to protecting the wetlands and the mangroves areas which have helped in the past for us to absorption of floods and saved us from calamities like tsunami, and have also delayed the sea level rise because the flood absorption capacity of these mangroves is huge. And some of the mangroves and even the wetland are acknowledged as the global sites for protection. Even if we see other measures, what we are trying to do is having a holding pond, which we have seen in the New Bombay area, where we have developed certain areas by having holding ponds and managing the high tide and low tide. But whenever there is an extreme event of highest rainfall and coinciding with the high tide level, then we are all into a vulnerable position. For that, we need holding ponds, and these holding ponds are now again being reconsidered to have a sponge city within the existing city for absorption of floods. However, let me all at a conclusion say that this is a human influence has warmed the climate unprecedented way in the last 2000 years. So what we have done in the last 50, 100 years is because of the huge carbon emissions, CFC emissions, and my learned speakers have talked about, contributed much more. And now it is our role and our responsibility to give it back to the nature by having adaptation measures and taking mitigation measures. So thank you very much for giving me time to speak on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Deshpande sir. And it is a nice talk again, giving overview of the pan-India picture and also bringing us to the effects that are going to happen for Mumbai region, especially the Mumbai Metropolitan region. And we have also discussed about various features of the Mumbai city, which is we always call it a maximum city of Mumbai. So everything is maximum. Here you see the urbanization is maximum, as well as you mentioned, the sponge layer that is available for Mumbai with wetlands and mangroves. This is also abundantly available. So how we can actually manage it and protect it for the future scenarios, that's what is the concern. I really appreciate the way that you actually projected it, and I'm sure the participants were excited to now listen to the discussions. We have a couple of questions from the participants. I will go ahead with the questions possibly one by one. Let me take the first question that has been asked for Dr. Tim. That is the list. In the list, it's the second question. Dr. Tim Fox, the question is directed to you, and the question says the global water level due to the melting ice in ports is expected to be 60 to 70 meters, but I believe the rise will be more than this height because an iceberg is 20%. What we see and 80% what we don't. So should we rely on this data? The question is from Mr. Asis Paikrai from Biju Patnaik University of Technology. Yeah, so Tim, you can possibly want to respond, or anyone can respond.
Okay, so first thing we have to do is we have to be clear that floating ice, such as that we have in the Arctic, in the North Pole, in the Northern Hemisphere, floating ice, when it melts, does not contribute to sea level rise per se, because the volume of water that results from the iceberg melting is equivalent to the displacement that the iceberg caused. So if you can do a very simple experiment, just take a glass of water, put some ice cubes in it, and when all the ice is melted, the water will be exactly the same level as it was before the melting started. So that's really important to understand. So what's really important for sea level rise, and that forms the basis of sea level rise, is the melting of land-based glaciers and land-based ice sheets, because that brings additional volume of liquid into the oceans. Because sea level rise is composed of two elements. One is the melting of the ice, but also the thermal expansion of the water itself as a result of the global average temperature going up. So as the air temperature goes up above the ocean, and as the ocean absorbs heat, it expands, and that contributes to sea level rise. But the very important point for the future is that the thermal element is in the overall component is decreasing relative to the land-based ice sheet melting component. So previously, the thermal component was the larger component, but as ice melting has accelerated in the past few decades, and the IPCC report explains all this, that the glacial melt component is taking over and is now the larger proportion and will be in the future. I hope that helps.
Yeah, so thanks, Tim, and I think the answer is very clear. It is not the sea ice, it is the land-based ice melting which is actually contributing to the sea level rise.
Correct.
Yeah, so let me just read out the next question, that is for Sri Shankar Deshpande. Question is from Mr. Kannan from B Engineering, IMechE. So he's a member of IMechE. He would like to know, can we mitigate the effect of this sea level rise as applicable to India, assuming that this will happen, so that there is minimal impact to residents of the coastal region? So it is kind of a generic question for any coastal region. Maybe Sri Deshpande sir, you can respond to this.
Yeah, certainly we have to seriously consider that the sea level rise is going to happen, and the global reports and the global institutes and research have almost concluded to an extent that it is going to rise by 1 meter in the next 25 to 30 years, if I am right on the figures, Professor sir. And if we assume that is going to happen, and as rightly said, there are going to be several impacts of it. One on infrastructure, one on livelihoods, one on transport, one on the sea intrusions. Yes, we will certainly have to consider into that, but it is not something that we should panic at. We definitely have to take mitigation measures. We have to have adaptation strategies. We have to plan these things, and the government and the policymakers are aware of this and are taking adaptive steps and policy. So we certainly will have, but as I already said now, as the standards are growing globally, as we saw from the first, talk by Professor John, which was very enlightening, and the global standards are now evolving, taking into consideration itself the thing. So when our design itself is now going to take this into consideration, we are definitely going to have better infrastructure, better citizens thing. But however, those who are already existing now, we have to take adaptation and mitigation measures for them.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Deshpande sir. And I'm sure that must have answered the question by the participant. So now the next question is an interesting question. In fact, what are the methods to increase the natural ice volume in glaciers in order to keep sea level rise minimum? The question is from Abhinav Kumar Pradhan. He's working in IIT Bombay. So, team, would you like to respond to the question?
Yes, okay, so this is a really interesting question. In addition to working on mitigation and adaptation over the years, I've done quite a lot of work on what's technically known as geoengineering, which is where we look to make engineered interventions into the climate system to effectively either slow down global warming or to have an impact on the effects of global warming on the environment and engineered infrastructure. So we have looked at whether there are plausible ways that we can engineer a freezing of ice sheets or to slow down the melting of ice sheets. But realistically, the amount of energy that these processes will consume and the scale of the challenge in terms of the amount of volume of ice sheet that we need to tackle and the environmental implications of trying to tackle those means that these are really non-tenable routes, and that the strategy going forward has to be a combination of overall mitigation, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions into the future, and adapting to the sea level rise that will inevitably come regardless of how much mitigation we do. I think I want to be absolutely clear that we will get sea level rise now for the next century and into the centuries beyond as a result of the emissions that we've already done and will do while we're transitioning to a net zero world. The sea level rise is inevitable now. It's unstoppable because the amount of heat that's been taken up by the oceans and the melting process, it has a very long time frame associated with it. So, we will have to adapt to sea level.
That's right. So thanks, Tim, for the response and nice explanation. Let us take the last question possibly. What should be our first, this is for Professor Mori, possibly you can respond. What should be our first step when we are willing to do something about our environment from the basic level, as well as we all know, climate crisis can destroy anything. So how can we save our future generation with this? This is a very, very generic question. You can talk for hours together, but you can quickly respond.
Okay, thank you, Professor Behera. Mitigation is the most important part of the activity to stop global warming. So reducing carbon dioxide energy and reducing global gas emission is the most important part of it. So, however, mitigation can be possible if we act on the global scale. So, but adaptation can be a regional activity. So both, we need to try to mitigate global gas emission, but we have to prepare the adaptation at the same time. That's my comment. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I think you are right. So we need the adaptation strategy, and as we have been listening all through the day, the adaptation strategy is the one that will be most important. And it is also needs to be planned properly so that it becomes cost effective. So we cannot plan something for 2,100 straight away and build, but we have to do or implement in a stage-wise process so that it is not overburdened on the taxpayers or the funding agencies. So there are one more question. There is one more question which basically asks, will there be any effect of sea level rise on the groundwater? So I can straight away answer yes. The answer is straight away yes, because if there is a sea level rise, obviously there will be some hydrostatic pressure building on the overall hydrodynamics that you are looking at, and because of that there will be a push from the bottom side, and there will be groundwater intrusion or the saltwater intrusion into the groundwater, and there will be pollution. So I hope my panel members will agree with me on that. So I have one question. Yes, Tim, please go ahead.
Yeah, that was I agree with you. That was one of the major findings of our work, was those combined effects of groundwater pressure on infrastructure and foundations and causing uplift, and on underground tanks causing pressure on tanks, but also the salt, the saline effect, so the salt in the water causing corrosion effects that we haven't had to deal with in the past.
All right. So
affecting agriculture, it affects industry.
Yes. So Deshpande, sir, please. You are muted.
Yeah. I have a question. My curious mind wants to know once the sea level rises, which team can help me. Do we see the capillary action taking place and the existing foundations becoming weak and the buildings becoming weak because of the sea level rises? Is it likely to happen?
I could answer that. Yes, that's the case, and also the salt within the water will cause reinforcing parts in the reinforced concrete of foundations to corrode. And in fact, there are theories around the collapse of that building in Florida recently that sea level rise may have had some impact on the strength of the foundations of that building. You recall about a month and a half ago a major collapse in Florida of a high level high building. So there is some considerable concern around that. And these sort of things are not taken into account in design codes at the moment.
Yeah.
So thank you. And although we are running out of time, just quick point to Tim. Actually, Tim, you mentioned that NOAA mentioned 2.7 meter rise by 2100. Is it a global estimate or is it some local estimate?
No, that's their estimate of the global mean sea level.
I see.
Which then has to be converted to a local sea level for the United States.
So now my question is maybe possibly to Tim and Professor Mori both. When we want to calculate or estimate the local sea level rise, so what are the factors that we should consider? We should consider the possible change in the tidal elevations or possible change due to the extreme storm surge and waves, wave setup. So what are the things that we should consider when we are talking about the local sea level rise, in addition to the ground level variation, of course?
So shall I say something first and then the professor?
Yeah.
So as I mentioned in my talk, you have to take that global mean sea level and then you calculate the local sea level, which can be significantly different. It can be significantly higher than the global mean sea level, or it can be a little bit lower than the global mean sea level, and that depends on the geography of the location and things like the circulation of ocean currents. In fact, the moon. Gravity of the moon and the gravity of the sea mass itself has an impact on that local calculation, as does the change in the land level as a result of the issues that I was talking about: loss of groundwater, abstraction for drinking water and industry, and rebound. The professor may have some other things to say.
So, Professor Mori.
Yeah, regarding mean sea level can be mainly affected by the current, like a Gulf of Mexico or cross shear, which can be changes maybe 10 to 20% compared to the global mean sea level. On the other hand, waves and storm surges are much different, depend on location by location. So if you need to make adaptation planning, you need a regional extreme sea level depending on location. Then you need more detail of the projection, including storm surges and others. So adaptation is difficult compared with projection.
Okay. So thank you so much, and it was a nice session we had, and I'm sure all the participants really enjoyed and gained a lot of knowledge. So I think we are already out of time. So I again thank all the speakers for the excellent talks and the discussions, and also the participants. Thank you so much for the questions and patient hearing. And we will now break and move back to the main session. Maybe Siva, do you have some time in between, or? Okay, so I request everyone to switch on the videos, please, so that all the participants also. Professor Parthasarathy is there. Everyone, please turn on your videos quickly. There may be some who will not. Yeah, some of them may not turn on their videos because they may be sitting in a place where they cannot. So we have to take a call. You can take a picture now. Yeah, cheese. Okay. Thank you so much. And now it will automatically move to the main section, or how it will happen? Okay. So Professor Parthasarathy, are we on time?
The breakout sessions were on time, more or less. Just I think the initial first we miscalculated the initial time.
Okay.
Otherwise, we're okay. We
So
are
now,
5:30, so we're okay.
yeah, now we can just click OK and move to the next main session.
Yes.
If somebody doesn't click OK, they will be anyway automatically moved after 20 seconds.
Yes, Professor Behera, thank you for managing this breakout session.
Thank you so much.